Welcome to this WiseOwl DAX for Power BI tutorial. In this part of the series we're going to look at how to work with text in your calculated columns. So we'll start with some simple examples of concatenating strings using a variety of techniques, and we'll look at how you can format different values in the strings you've concatenated as well. We'll also show you how to extract text from a string, whether that's from the left, the right or the middle, and look at how to find or search for characters to locate the position you want to extract the text from. We'll explain how you can trim text using the trim function to get rid of any leading or trailing spaces, and then towards the end of the video explain how to replace or substitute text within a larger string. So let's get started. To get started, I've created a new blank report, and as usual the first thing I'll do in here is import some data from an Excel workbook. So I'll pick one of the options which allows me to do that. And then when I've browsed to the location that I've saved my movies workbook in, I'll double click on that to launch the import wizard. As usual, I'll drop a link in the video description so you can download this same file yourself. Once the dialog is launched, I'm going to check the box next to the movies worksheet. Then I can click the load button to import all this data into the report's data model. When that's happened, I can have a quick check in the fields list over here on the right hand side to make sure that I've imported all the columns I'm expecting. For the first basic calculated column we'll create in this video, we're going to concatenate the values of two columns in this table together to form a larger piece of information. But just before we do that, I want to take a quick look at why it might be necessary. So let's start by creating a visual in the report. I'm going to add a basic clustered column chart, and then I'm going to resize this so it fills the full size of the page. And let's just get rid of the filters panel temporarily so we can see things a little more clearly. Then in the axis bucket of the field well, I'm going to drop the title field from the movies table. And then in the values bucket, I'm going to drop the runtime, and that's going to generate a sum of runtime. Now ideally what I'm trying to do here is show one single column for each film in my dataset, but the problem is I have several films which have duplicated titles. So some of these titles, like the first one, Anna Karenina, is showing a total runtime of 472 minutes. That's a pretty long film, even I wouldn't sit there watching that. What I really want to do is separate this column out into however many versions of Anna Karenina there are in the database. Just if you wanted to check that you do have duplicated values, one quick simple way to do that in the chart is to change the sum of runtime by clicking on the drop down list next to it into a count. And in there we'll see that we've got 4 different versions of Anna Karenina, 3 different versions of Godzilla, etc. and 2 of many other films as well. Let's just switch back to a sum of runtime. Then we can head back to the data view by clicking the data button on the left hand side, and then create our calculated column to make our film titles unique. A simple way to make our film titles unique is to concatenate them with the unique ID column that we've imported from the movies database. I know these IDs are unique because the data was originally exported from a SQL Server database where the ID column was a primary key, and that guarantees that the values in there must be unique. So all we're going to do is create a new column in the usual way. I'm going to click my new column button, and then let's call this new column, if I just zoom in so you can see what I'm doing, I'll call this one title unique, and I'll make it equal to, and then we're going to use a function that's designed for concatenation. It's called concatenate. So I can insert the concatenate function. You'll notice you can only concatenate 2 bits of text with this function, but that's okay because we've only got 2 things we want in this first basic example. So I'll refer to the film or the movie's title column first, and then the movie's ID column second. I can close the round brackets and press enter, and now I've got a unique title with the number of the film's ID attached to the end of the title. I appreciate it doesn't look great right now, but we'll improve on that in a moment. The important thing is that if we go back to the report view and we swap out the original title column for the title unique column, we do now get a single column for each individual film. So the longest film is no longer quite so long, 472 minutes. It's only 260. Still quite long in my book. Just before we go back and start improving the appearance of the calculated column we've created, it's worthwhile mentioning how you could generate your own ID or index column if you don't already have one. A convenient way to do that in Power BI Desktop is to use the Power Query Editor. As it turns out, a lot of the things we're going to be doing in this video using DAX would be far more convenient and easy to do in the Power Query Editor. But just for the moment, I'm going to get you to find the Queries section on the Home tab of the ribbon, and then click the top half of that button to open the Query Editor. Now, every single thing that you import into a Power BI report generates a query, just you don't normally see them unless you open up the Power Query Editor. What we're going to do here is head over to the Add Column tab, and then choose Index Column, and I'm just going to click the drop-down arrow at the right-hand side. I'm going to choose to build my new index column from a value of 1, so I'm going to choose the From 1 option, although it doesn't really matter too much, and that's sufficient to create a brand new column starting at the number 1 for the first film, and then simply incrementing by 1 for each additional film in the table. So every value in that column is completely unique. To save those changes and get back to Power BI Desktop, I can head back to the Home tab here in the Power Query Editor and then click the Close and Apply button to update those changes and add that new index column into my data model. So you see that one's appeared there. So if I headed back to the data view, we could easily have just concatenated the value of the index column rather than the value of the ID column, and that would have guaranteed that our film titles were unique as well. Now let's work on improving the appearance of the calculated column we created, because at the moment just tagging the ID number onto the end of the film name looks a bit messy. And it's also potentially quite confusing as well. Look, we've got Lethal Weapon 423. I think Danny Glover would definitely be too old for this stuff at that point in the franchise. So what we'll do is insert a space after the film title but before the ID. The problem at the moment is that with the concatenate function, we have no convenient way to do that. I pointed out earlier that concatenate only has 2 parameters for the 2 individual bits of text you want to put together. So what we'll do first, if we did want to use concatenate, just to show you that it is possible, I'm going to replace movie's ID with a literal space in some double quotes. Then what I would like to do is concatenate that concatenated text to the movie ID. So I could wrap another concatenate function around this existing concatenate function, click at the end of the line, type in a comma, and then refer to the movie's ID. I didn't say this was a good solution, but just to show you and prove that it can work. So if I close the extra set of round brackets for the extra concatenate, that inserts a space, makes things look a little neater. Now a slightly more elegant choice would be to use a function called CombineValues. This isn't really strictly speaking what the function is designed for, but we can take advantage of it just to concatenate several bits of text with a space in between each piece of information. So let's just get rid of everything on that line apart from CO, and I'm going to say CombineValues from the IntelliSense, hit the tab key to see the list of parameters. So with this one we begin with the delimiter. What piece of information, what character do you want to see in between each bit of text you put together? So I'd like to put a space, a literal space in some double quotes. I can then type in a comma and refer to the first expression, the first thing I want to concatenate. So that's going to be the movie's title, and then another comma, and then I could refer to the ID column, movie's ID. And if I wanted to, I could carry on at that point by adding more commas and referring to more columns or writing more bits of text. But for this first basic example, I want to stop at movie's ID, close the round brackets, and then hit enter. And the end result will be the same as the nested concatenate function, but in a slightly neater way. Now that we can list multiple values to concatenate much more easily, we could try making the ID stand out a little bit or separate it from the film title by wrapping it in some round brackets. So to do that in the CombineValues function, after the movie's title, and I've typed in a comma, I'm going to insert some literal text in some double quotes, an open round bracket symbol, followed by a comma, and then movie's ID, and then after movie's ID, another comma, and then a closed round bracket symbol in some double quotes. So when I hit enter now, That will indeed place a set of round brackets around the ID number, but slightly annoyingly, because of the way CombineValues works, it also puts a space in between each value. I don't really want to have that space there at all. What would be really convenient for CombineValues would be to say, well, separate these things with an empty string, so don't put any characters between them, just let me choose which bits of information I put together in the way I want. So I'd want a space after the movie title but before the open round bracket, so I could type in a literal space there in those double quotes. Then I don't want a space before the movie's ID or after the movie's ID before the close round bracket. That would be great, but unfortunately, when I press enter, it won't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because CombineValues can't accept an empty string as its first parameter, as its delimiter. So this leads us to probably the simplest solution for concatenating things. Don't bother trying to use functions to do it. Just use the concatenate operator instead. So I'm going to wipe out this entire expression and start with a reference to the movie's title, and then use a single ampersand as the concatenate operator. Then I can choose whatever I want to concatenate, so I'll put a space and an open round bracket in some double quotes, followed by another ampersand and then the ID, and then another ampersand, and then in some more double quotes the closed round bracket. Finally, when I press enter, I'll have the result I want, the film title with its unique ID in some round brackets at the end. The final thing I'd like to do with this column is make the piece of information inside the round brackets a little more meaningful to somebody reading the report. So although the ID is unique and it gives me the results in the chart that I want, it's not exactly meaningful to somebody reading the report. So let's replace the ID with some of the information from the release date column. I think it's fairly unlikely we'll release more than one film with the same title on the same date. So a nice simple thing we could do there is get rid of the ID field and refer to the release date field instead. I'm just going to ignore this extra menu that's appeared for the moment and explain what that's about shortly. I'll press the escape key to clear that extra menu, and then press enter to update my formula and see the complete date entered inside those round brackets. Now that's a little more useful, but perhaps a little too much information, perhaps. I think we could probably get away with just displaying the year that the film was released in. Again, it's pretty unlikely we'll release more than one film with the same title in the same year. To return the year from the release date, we have a couple of choices. I'm going to bring back that menu that I cleared earlier by typing in a full stop after the release date. And that provides me with a list of properties of the date. So if I wanted to have just the year, I could insert the year from the list and then hit enter, and that will show me just the year of the film's release. If you didn't see this extra menu appear, it may mean that you have a slightly different setting applied in Power BI Desktop's settings to do with the automatic date time intelligence. This is something we're going to cover in a lot of detail later on in this series. I don't want to talk about it too much right now. So if you don't see or have access to this extra properties list, you can get the year of a release date by using a function instead. So I'm going to get rid of the .year property, and then in front of the movie's release date column reference, I'm going to insert the year function. So I'll refer to the year, open some round brackets, and then close some round brackets after the release date column. Press enter to update the formula, and once again we've got the year of the film's release listed after its title, and that is a particularly meaningful piece of information. You can see it in several places, both on the chart labels and in the chart tooltips when you hover the mouse cursor over one of the film names. For the next example, I'd like to take a look at what happens when we concatenate a formatted value. So let's head back to the data view first, and then I'm going to pick on the budget column and then head to the currency format tool and choose to format that as English United States. So that means we'll get the $ at the beginning and units of thousands separated by commas and a couple of decimal places there too. Now I'd like to create a calculated column that says something like the film's title followed by the word cost followed by the value of the budget column. So to do that, let's create a new column. and we'll call this one something like film cost equals, and then I'm going to refer to the title column first, concatenate that with the word cost in some double quotes, and I've deliberately included spaces either side of the word cost there, you'll notice, and then another ampersand, and then a reference to the budget column. Now, when I press enter, we will indeed get the value of the budget column, but it doesn't include any formatting. If you do want to apply a format to a value when you're concatenating it with other values, you can use the cleverly named format function. So just in front of the reference to the movie's budget column, I can write the word format, open some round brackets, and then fill in two parameters for the format function. The first is the value that I want to apply the formatting to, so that's the movie's budget, followed by a comma, and then the format I would like to apply. Now there are several things I can do with the format parameter. There are some named formats I can apply. For instance, there's a named format called currency. And if I close the double quotes and then close the round brackets, now bear in mind I want to see US dollars as the currency symbol, and you may be able to tell from my accent that I'm not actually based in the United States. So when I press enter, unfortunately for this example, I get the pound sterling symbol instead. So that's not particularly helpful. So in this case, I'm going to get rid of that named currency format and write my own custom format code instead. Now these are the same custom format codes you can write in the format text box up here. I'm going to start with the dollar symbol and then just a simple digit of 0. And if I press enter now, you'll see that I get the dollar symbol at the front of the number, although I lack now some of the other fancier effects. I don't get the comma separators or the decimal places. Adding the decimal places is relatively easy. If I type in a full stop and then as many decimal values as I like, I'll just go for the 2. That will bring back the 2 decimal places. Adding the comma separators is a little more fiddly. The pattern I need to write just after the dollar symbol is a hash, comma, hash, hash 0. So that represents the pattern of digits that might appear, and that pattern is repeated for however large the number is. If I press enter now, I'll get the commas repeating every set of 3 digits. There are a couple of other slightly more clever things I can do here as well. Just before the decimal point, if I typed in a single comma there and then pressed enter, what you'll see is that one set of 3 digits gets stripped off. So I've scaled the number to 1000. If I typed in another comma at the end, before the decimal point, and press enter again, that strips off another set of 3 digits and effectively scales the number to 1,000,000. So at this point I could actually add a letter. Let's add the letter M after the double decimal places, hit enter again, and now I've got my numbers reading a little bit more succinctly, 175.00M. There will be some budgets that do actually have a decimal value in here somewhere. There we go, 72.5 million there. I think for this example I might even be tempted to get rid of the decimal places altogether. So let's just go for the double comma and then the M, and that's a nice sort of label that I can read and maybe assign to some visuals in the report. I'm kind of just scratching the surface of what you can do there with custom number formats, and if you are interested in some more detail, then there is an entire page dedicated to the format function on the Microsoft Docs site. So I'll drop this link in the video description so you can get to this fairly easily. So you'll see quite a few other cool things you can do with that. But I think for our example, that's probably good enough for now. So now that we've spent some time putting text together, let's look at how we can do the opposite and split some large bits of text into separate parts. Now this is the point at which, if you wanted to do this for real in a proper report, you definitely want to consider doing it in the Power Query Editor. A lot of the things we're about to do using DAX can be done really simply with a couple of clicks in Power Query. We do have a few videos which talk you through how to do some of those things, so in the Power BI tutorial series, in part 1.2, creating and publishing your first report, and then in part 3, in the various sections in there, we go into some detail in how the query editor works. For this video, of course, this series is all about DAX, so we're going to have to do things the difficult way, I'm afraid, but we're going to start with a fairly simple example. The first thing I'd like to do is just extract the first character from the film name. And I'll show you why we're going to do that in just a moment. But let's create the calculated column first. So I'm going to click on the new column button. and I'm going to call this new column Film Initial. I'm going to make it equal to the result of a function called left, which you may well have encountered in other Microsoft products. So I'm going to refer to the film title column. The second parameter says how many characters from the left of the specified string you want to return. You can omit that, you can tell that it's listed in square brackets there. And if you don't specify a number of characters, you get just one. That's the number that I want, so I could omit the number of characters parameter. I'm actually going to type in the number 1. It's nice to be specific about things like this. If I then close the round brackets and then press enter, we'll extract the first character from the left of the film's title into a new column. And this provides us with a nice way to create some kind of slicer or filter in the report. If we switch back to page 1 where we created our chart earlier on, I'm going to give myself a bit of space up at the top here. And then in that blank section, I'm going to insert a slicer from the visualizations panel. Let's just reduce the size of that as well to fit in the space I've given it. Then I'm going to put the film initial field into the slicer. And I'm going to change the layout of that slicer as well. So I'm going to go to the format, the paint roller tool, just below the visualizations panel. And in the general section, change the orientation from vertical to horizontal. So we can see there that we get a set of buttons. We've effectively created a sort of directory type slicer. So I could click on a single letter and see all the films whose title begins with that letter in the chart. One additional thing it would be nice to do with this slicer is group all the numbers together into a single item that says, say, 0 to 9. We have a fairly convenient way we can do that. If you look at the way these items are organised in the slicer, they're sorted alphabetically or in ascending order, so you can see that all the numbers appear before any of the letters. So we could check if the first character we've extracted from the film's title is less than the letter A, then we can group it together as a digit. So to do that, let's head back to the data view, and then at the beginning of this expression, we can write an if function. So let's say if, open some round brackets, and then just for a neater layout, I'm going to press Shift and Enter to take that left function down to the next line. At the end of that, I can check if that's less than the first letter, the letter A, of course, followed by a comma. And if that's true, on the next line, I want to calculate that that is a single label 0 to 9. I can then type in a comma after that, and then Shift and Enter. Otherwise, I just want to produce that same formula, left movie's title, comma 1. So let's just copy and paste that. I'll close the extra set of round brackets for the if function, press Enter, and then if we have a look back at the report view, we should see that our slicer now has a single option, 0 to 9, and if I click on that, it shows me any films whose first letter or first character is a numeric digit from 0 to 9. So when the number of characters you want to return is the same on each row of the table, things are fairly straightforward. But it gets a bit trickier when the number of characters you want to return varies row by row. To demonstrate that, let's head back to the data view, and I'd like to create a column which extracts the director's first name into a separate column. The problem with this, of course, is that each director has a different number of characters in their first name. So to solve this problem, we're going to try to calculate the position of the character which separates the first name from the other names. So we're going to try to locate the position of a space character in the director's full name. We've got a couple of functions we can use to do this. Let's start by creating the new column, and I'm going to call this one first name or director first name equals, and then I could use either the search function or I could use the find function. And the single major difference between these two functions is that find is case sensitive and search isn't. As we're trying to look for a space character, it doesn't really matter which of the two we choose to use here. So I'm going to go with the find function. And the first two parameters are compulsory. What I'm looking for, so I'm looking for a literal space character, and then within the director column. The third parameter, start position, indicates which character you begin your search from. If you miss that out, it starts searching from character number 1, which is what I want. The not found value parameter, well, let's see why that's particularly useful. If I close some round brackets here and press enter, I end up with an error in the first name column. The reason that's happened is because there's at least one row in which no space character has been found. So you see the little error message here, the search text provided could not be found in the given text. So if I go back to the parameters and type in a comma after I've referred to the movie's director column, I want to skip over the start position by typing in 2 commas to skip to the not found value. So what I could do here is type in the number 0 to indicate that you haven't found that character, and if I press enter now, it will return a number to that column, indicating the position of the space character. So now that we know how many characters we want to return from the left, we can pass the results of this function into the left function to extract the director's first name. So let's add a left function in front of find, and then we'll search within the director column, followed by a comma, and the find function calculates how many characters we want to get from the left. So I'm just going to close the round brackets. So just bear in mind at the moment for Tom and people like Rob and Sam, we're calculating the number 4. If I press enter, that's going to return the first 4 characters from their names. And in this column here, while it looks like just the word Tom, there is this additional trailing space at the end there. Trailing spaces can cause problems. Often when you import data, you end up with trailing or leading spaces that you want to get rid of. And again, in Power Query, there are really convenient, easy ways to get rid of those extra spaces. In DAX, we can use the trim function to strip off any leading or trailing spaces from a string of text. So I'm going to add a trim function around my left function. Trim is nice and easy, you just pass a string of text into it, this single parameter, and when I press enter, the end results don't look any different, but I've successfully gotten rid of that extra space. One small problem that we do have left to deal with is the fact that for any director who doesn't have a space in their name, we're currently returning 0 characters from the left, so they effectively don't have a name, or at least no first name according to our list. And in fact, if we check that, if we click on the drop down arrow at the top of the first name column, we can see that there is an empty string entry there. And just so we can see who that is, let's uncheck the select all box, check the empty string box and click OK, and we'll find that's a director who has no first name, but whose full name is McG. Bit of a silly name, but hey, there we go. So what we'll do instead of returning 0 characters from the left of their name, if they have no space in their name, is return the full name. So I want to return all the characters. A simple way to do that is to change the 0 there to use the len function, which will return the total number of characters in the string. So I'm going to say len, open some round brackets, and then refer to the director column and close the extra set of round brackets, which is getting a little difficult to see. So perhaps it would be worth just spending a little bit of time tidying this up a little. So let's just take these various different parameters and functions down to separate lines. I think I'll leave the double comma there on a single line, and then let's get all the round brackets in the right place as well. Okay, that's so much better. Nice, excellent. So if we hit enter now, we should find that McG disappears because his first name is no longer an empty string. And if we head back to the filter tool and scroll downwards, we should indeed find that Mr. McG is sitting right there. So his first name is now listed as McG. So let's just clear that filter, and that will solve that problem with the first name. Returning the other names for each director into a separate column is going to follow similar principles, just with an extra bit of arithmetic thrown in. We've got a couple of choices here for how we could do this. As well as a left function, which gets characters from the left of a string, there's a right function, which gets characters from the right of a string, and there's also a mid function, which allows you to start somewhere in the middle of a string and get a certain number of characters from that point. We could use either mid or right for this example. I'm going to use the right function, and the number of characters I will want to get from the right of this director's full name is equal to the length of the string minus the location of the space. If there is no space, I want to subtract the length of the full string from the length of the full string to return 0 characters from the right. So I won't get a director whose first name and other names are McG. That would be an even sillier name. So we'll just return 0 characters if they have no space in their name. Okay, so with that in mind, let's create a new column. And I'm going to say other names. It might not just be the last name, there might be multiple names. So we'll say other names, and then we'll use the right function. So again, we need to start by specifying the bit of text we're getting characters from the right of. So that's movies director. Then the number of characters I want to get, as I said, was equal to the length of the director's name. Try that again. Length of the director's name minus the location of the space, but using the length of the director's full name if there is no space to be found. So I'm going to use the find function again, and then I'm going to try to find a space character within the director column, and then I'm going to type in 2 commas to skip over the start position to get to the not found value. And if I don't find a space, I want to return the length of the director name. Okay, so we've got the length function. I'm just going to close the round brackets on the next line to correspond with the open round brackets for the find function, and then close one more set of round brackets for the right function, hit enter, and I will end up with the other names for each director, but I should have an empty string entry in here, which indeed I do, which should correspond to Mr. McG, and there he is again. Perfect. So it's certainly not impossible to get this done. It's just incredibly fiddly, and if you do have the choice, then definitely consider using Power Query for this sort of thing instead. For the final example in this video, I just want to take a quick look at how you can replace or substitute text in a column with a new value. And to demonstrate that, we're going to use the Harry Potter films as an example. So I'm just going to start by filtering my title column so that we see the Harry Potter films. It's not necessary to do this to make the technique work, it just makes it easier to see the results. So I can click OK there and show all the Harry Potter films. Now we're going to replace the name Harry Potter in this list with any other name, because apparently, according to my deep and intensive research for this video, apparently literally any other character in the Harry Potter books is the actual true hero of Harry Potter. Anybody but Harry Potter, apparently. I don't think Ron's name crops up that much, honestly, but Neville, Snape, Hermione crops up a lot. Sirius Black. So Draco Malfoy is a controversial choice. It doesn't matter which name you pick for this. Don't even bother picking a Harry Potter character. Go for Darth Vader or Deadpool if you want to. The important thing is we're going to get rid of Harry Potter and replace him with a different name. So in order to do that, if I head back to the report and I create a new column, I'm going to call this one True Hero, I suppose. True Hero equals. Now there are a couple of different functions you can use to get rid of one bit of text and replace it with another. So there is a function called replace. The idea behind replace, though, is that you specify the starting position in a column. So I could say the title column and then start at character number 1, and then say that the number of characters I want to replace would be 12. That's the number of characters in Harry space Potter. And then the new text would be whatever I want. Let's go for Deadpool. But the problem with that is that it wouldn't be limited to the Harry Potter movies. That would replace the first 12 characters of every single film with the word Deadpool. And that's not quite what I wanted to do. So in this case, rather than using the replace function, we're going to use the substitute function instead. So we'll say substitute, and then we can refer to the title column. The old text will be Harry Potter, so we'll only replace Harry Potter where it appears. and the new text will be, I'm going to go for Darth Vader. I think that would be quite an interesting film to watch. I'd definitely pay to watch that. So there's one final parameter, instance number. If there were more than one instance of the phrase Harry Potter in the film title, you could choose which instance of Harry Potter you replace. But we've only got one instance of Harry Potter, so we can close the round brackets after our new text. And if we press enter at that point, that will substitute Harry Potter for, in my case, Darth Vader. So where Harry Potter was is now listed as Darth Vader. They sound like far more interesting and entertaining films, if you ask me. Just to demonstrate that it's not affected any of the other films, let's just remove our filter from the title column. And if we see now that all of the other films have been unaffected, so sadly Darth Vader isn't in any of those. So there you go, there's a fairly basic overview of some of the main things you might want to do with text in your DAX expressions. We'll see several of those techniques crop up again later on in the series, but I hope you found that one useful for now. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.